2 weeks ago, we had a big long session where we talked about, I don't think the game is very fun, and what are we going to do to fix it? Here are the big problems with the game. Here's our plans. Here's what we're going to do forward. We've been doing that over the last 2 weeks, and we're not done yet. Things are really broken, and there was kind of a discussion last night, and this isn't ready to be shown. This isn't good. But the problem is I keep canceling live streams because I'm like, it's not ready. It's not ready. I want to talk about some of what we've been doing, and I actually want to show you guys some tips about being a game developer and how to work with data. And to do that, I actually want to crack open one of my Excel files. This is where the game gets made, is in this, it's where part of the game gets made, is in this great big huge Excel sheet. And this great big huge Excel sheet is basically a place that's a repository for all the data that drives the game. If you're going to store a bunch of data and you're going to have that data be something that you can index and work with and manipulate, then Excel is a great tool for doing that. A lot of people, when they make games, they put all of their game data just in like a raw Lua file or a text file or something like that. And I'm going to show you a bunch of stuff today which will explain why we don't do that. And it'll explain the power of using Excel for making games. What you're looking at right now is the export sheet. The export sheet is what actually allows us to export the data into I think it saves out as a Lua file, and the game actually uses that Lua file. And then down here along the bottom, you can see there's a bunch of little tabs, and these tabs relate to all of the various things that are in the game. Right now, let's go to the minions. This is where all of the creatures in the game live. So, for instance, the militia and the chainsaw shock troops and the Griffin dragoons, they're all here, right? The question is, when I've got a piece of data, if I've got a record, right, and we can think of any one row of this Excel file as a record being all of the data related to one object in the game. In this case, let's use the tusked apes, which is one of the units in the game. This is one of our pieces of data. How do I relate to the tusked apes? Well, okay, and a lot of young developers would say, okay, I'm going to make a file and it's tusked_apes or something. Problem is, later on in the game, you decide you don't want them to be tusked apes, you want them to be striped apes, or you want them to be tusked boar, or you want them to be something else, and you change them. But you've got a whole bunch of crap in the game that all references the apes. So for instance, you've got an icon file, which is the little icon that shows up when you use them. You've got the portrait of the character. You've got the effect that plays when he shows up, and all of that is going to be referencing this record. And if that record is named something very specific, like tusked apes, you get a lot of weirdness later on in the game when you start manipulating stuff. And so actually the tusked apes in the game aren't really named tusked apes. Tusked apes, this is actually just a flag that or not a flag, it's one little piece of data that I've added that says, oh, by the way, when you show this to the player, call it tusked apes. That's what you'll call it. But your real name in the universe is fact02_unit02, which is easy for me to cross-reference. This is the second unit of the second faction, right? And now for all other things, and if we go look over to the other side of the Excel file, you'll notice, for instance, what's his portrait called? Well, portrait fact2unit2. What's his spawn effect? And right now we haven't done specific spawn or death effects for each individual unit, so it's generic. But you know, what's the surface? What's the icon that it uses called? Well, fact02unit02. All of this stuff sort of magically works. It's the same thing if we go to the minion powers. Let's say I've got a spell. You know, one of my powers is I can use muskets. Right now, I could name all of this, and this is where you have to kind of think about it. Could I have named all of these Power 1, Power 2, Power 3, Power 4? Yeah, I probably could have done that, but at that point you've gone sort of too far in the other direction, and you've gone to the place where, like, I don't really know what I'm doing, and I don't know what this is, and I have to keep looking up stuff and re-referencing stuff. So in this case, we decided to kind of err on the other side and say, well, let's call it something sort of straightforward, like musket fire or mounted guns. But you also notice a lot of things, they get sort of systemized names. So like power on death summon, I know what that is just by looking at it. I summon things when something dies. So that's sort of a reasonable way of naming things and understanding things. So that's naming. So here's 3 very basic pieces of data for my tusked ape. What's his attack, what's his hit points, and what's his movement, right? Those are pretty straightforward things. The sort of thing that you would imagine you would put in for a thing. And it's very straightforward to just say, well, okay, well, he has a 4 attack and 6 hit points and a movement of 1, right? Pretty straightforward stuff. What we do actually, though, is this is not actually his attack and hit points. This is actually a reference scaling his attack and hit points versus everyone else in the game. And I know that sounds asinine. I know it sounds like, well, why would you use that level of obfuscation? What's the point to that, right? So what I've actually done is I've said, all right, for right now, I believe he has an attack strength of 4 compared to the horse artillery, which has a strength of 1 attack strength, right? So he should be about 4 times as strong of an attack as the horse artillery are. And he's about half as strong an attack as a chainsaw shock troop, for instance, right? So the first step in balancing stuff is this. Now that I've got everything sorted out and I've said, this is how strong I want them to be in comparison to each other, the next step is to say, all right, how strong do I want attacks to be in general compared to everything else in the game? I was talking about the tusked apes. So here's the apes, right? Fact 2, Unit 2, right? They've got an attack strength of 4 in comparison to everything else, right? And then I'm going to multiply that out, and that's going to return to me over here on the other side what is the actual number of attack strength, right? And that's actually me multiplying this by a constant, and I've put the constant up here at the top of the column. Now, right now, because this is my first shot at it, I just made the constant 1, right? This is kind of what I think things will play out as. But later on, I may be playing the game and I'm going to get one of 2 pieces of criticism. Piece 1 of criticism will be, those monkeys are too strong compared to everything else. Great, if the monkeys are too strong compared to everything else, I go back to the tusked apes and I say, all right, that 4, you know what? Let's make that a 3. Now they're less strong compared to everything else, right? The other possible criticism I'll get is, dude, this game takes forever. All the attack strengths are way too weak. I want everyone to attack more. Oh, that's easy. I'll go right here and I'll change that 1 to a 2. Boom. And now we can see over here, now all of my attack strengths have just been doubled, right? And so now I can very quickly, and as you get more and more and more units, and we're talking about a game that's intending to have 100 or more units, as we get more and more units, I can very quickly make these sort of adjustments. Now, my guess is that we probably, because the attack strength is sort of the root of everything, that one probably won't get changed that much. But for instance, the hit points, that's one that I do expect to change a lot, right? Because one of the questions is, how many times should my unit get hit before it dies? That's a basic question of a strategy game. Now, again, there's 2 parts of this question. How many times should a unit get hit in general? And how many times should a unit get hit by this specific unit? And now I can handle either one of those 2 questions. If I believe, for instance, that my tusked apes are dying too soon from everybody, right? Let me rephrase that. If I believe that my tusked apes are dying too soon, just like everybody else, well, then I don't want to go and change every single one of these numbers here and you know, laboriously add 1 to every unit in the game. Instead, I can go over here and say, okay, all these hit points, you know what? Let's multiply them all by 1.5. And bam, everything magically is... Oh, excuse me. I changed that in the wrong place. Let's change this by 1.5. Bam, everything is magically more and everyone has magically more hit points. And now the game is just suddenly going to become a lot slower because everyone dies a lot faster, or dies a lot slower. Or, to the opposite, Somebody can say, man, your game takes forever. Oh, that's easy. I can make that go a lot faster. Now everything dies twice as fast. Or somebody could come to me and say, you know what, Chris, these monkeys, these particular monkeys don't stay alive long enough. Oh, okay, that's a problem I can solve. I go to the apes and I say, apes, you know what, why don't you have a health of 10, right? So that's, undo that. That's sort of the way we handle data. And the next sort of question is, well, all right, if I'm controlling them by having a limited number of control points, if I have 50 control points and those 50 control points are all that I can use to control all of my units, there's now a question of how much should one unit cost? How many units do I think 50 control points should be worth, right? Again, we have the same question. Is that, you know, how much should this one particular unit be worth compared to the others, and how much should they be worth in general? And we need to start with some kind of basic rule for what do things cost in this game. So I created this cost column, and you will note up here in the formula, for those of you who don't know what an mround function is, the mround function is one of my favorite functions in Excel. That means, can you please round this number, do some math, make a number, and then round this number to the nearest, where is the integer at the end here. So I've actually decided that I would like all of my costs to make them easy for players to remember and to make them easy to understand. I'd like them all to be multiples of 5. So I'm saying, can you do all this crazy math and round it to the nearest 5, right? And then what the crazy math is, if you look at the crazy math, is essentially I'm looking at all of these different aspects of these things that the unit has. So for instance, its attack and its hit points, whether or not it has defense, what its move is, and I've assigned a value to each one of those things. Now I can go in and change the math whenever I want and change the weighting however I want. If I feel, for instance, later on, hey, you know what, I actually think attack is worth more than defense, so I should weight it more. I could change that math however I want. And then by simply scrolling down and you know, autofilling this function across the whole thing, I can quickly compute costs for everything. Now, you'll notice one of the things that is part of the math is this column here, which is the special column. And what the special column is I'm actually just counting how many specials does this thing have. So for instance, if I look at the Chainsaw Shock Troops, they have the shield ability and the weapon break ability. So they have 2. Now, obviously, some of these specials are going to be stronger and more important than other specials. Later on, as I begin doing a more fine-tuned balancing of everything, I might say, well, he's only got 2 specials, but you know what? I'm going to put a value of 2.5 here because some of these specials are a little bit more powerful than other specials, right? And I can begin to adjust it based on that and start putting some sort of more soft, fudgy numbers in. You will notice that this carries over to the chart here. This is the chart that tells me whether or not I can summon creatures and how much it costs to summon them. And so that data is over here as well, and that's all referencing the stuff back there. Then I'm basing how long does it take them to cool down based off of that. So it's all kind of being calculated and spitting out good starting values. When we looked at the game last week and the week before, when we said let's have buildings that we could build, large list of possible buildings, had all these fun abilities and this. But when we actually put it into the game, the truth was there was just so much stuff going on screen that you couldn't really pay attention. You couldn't really figure out what was going on, and it was actually less fun to have more stuff. I want to make sure that all of the decisions that the players are making are critical, important decisions. I don't want this to be a game about 1,000 little tiny tactical decisions. I cut the list of buildings down to a much sort of shorter list of buildings that all were more meaningfully different. So that when you chose to build this building instead of this building, it wasn't that this building gives you a slightly better thing than this one. It was that this building was substantially different from this one, and that was a strategic decision that you made to do this thing. When I start thinking about whether or not we have 1 resource or 2 resources, at one point this game actually had 3 resources. I get myself in the same question of which is more important to me. People being able to have that level of fine-tuning or people being able to make quick, big strategic decisions about what they're going to build and what they're not going to build. And if you only have one resource, the strategic decision becomes not, do I build this resource or that resource? It becomes, do I build resources or do I build military? Do I build the thing that allows me to build more units, or do I build more units and go kill more units? And that, as a basic decision, in some ways for me sounds more fun. On this game, one of the decisions that I made very early on was to move a little bit of the focus away from this game is no fun at all unless you have other players to play against, and move it towards, we're going to have an interesting single player game, we're going to have interesting campaigns, you're going to be able to have a good time with this game playing it single player. And my hope is, if we do that, we will get more people in playing single player. And when we have more people in playing single player, that will actually grow the audience. And by growing the audience, we will, as a byproduct, have more people that are available to play multiplayer. I still want multiplayer to be a huge part of this game. I still want people to be able to play this game and have a good time in multiplayer. And because of that, I'm still making decisions that are based around making sure that the game is fun in multiplayer, which means making faster, bigger, more strategic decisions instead of tactical decisions. But I think this game is maybe a little less, I don't want to say dumbed down, but I would say simplified. I think it's a little less simplified than Legends of Callasia in terms of what I'm tactically doing per turn. There's a lot more options in a turn. I move this guy here or here. There's more hexes to go to, that sort of thing. Because I want the game to play a little bit slower, play a little bit longer, and be a little bit more fun in a single player setting where there's more things to do, more sort of campaign goals that I can give you, that sort of thing. So if you look at each one of these factions, one of my issues with the factions were they were too similar. There were too many factions that were like, okay, this is a faction, and he's got his flying unit, and he's got his horse unit, and he's got it. Like, every faction had one of each kind of sort of a different class of unit. And one of the things I'm trying to do in the rebalance, I'm not done yet, but in the rebalance, I'm trying to make it so that the factions have specific strengths and weaknesses. So, for instance, if I bring Ivorians, the Ivorians are all about magic. That's a magical faction. Those are evil wizards that live in the jungle. They have cool evil wizard spells. They're going to use a lot of mana. They're going to produce a lot of mana. That's going to be, if I bring guys from this faction, it's going to have that flavor to it. And I might find that those guys are particularly good against something, right? And the idea that you kind of figure out how to build an interesting regiment based off of these things, that's kind of what we're trying to get at the heart of the game. I don't want the game to be, I figured out what the best regiment is and I bring the best regiment every time because that's my utilitarian regiment that always works. I want it to be that there is a meta, and the meta is, okay, a bunch of people figured out if you build this one regiment using these guys from these factions, that's really powerful. And then other people say, oh, well, people keep running that regiment. You know what? I figured out a regiment that's got the guys that can beat that. That's where I want it to go. But again, getting from that idea to the reality of implementing it involves playing around with a bunch of special abilities and playing around with a bunch of special powers and making sure that they work and making sure that they're fun and that they're balanced and that one of them can't be used in such a way that that unit is overpowered and no fun, or countered in such a way that that unit is useless and not fun. There's a long road from here to there, and that road is what we'll be walking down over the next 6 months or so. So here's Carl, right? Carl has some interesting abilities. He's a siege master, which doubles the fortification of any city. He can build things. He can defend. He can turn people into militia if they're weak. He can raise things. So let's have him go do some stuff. So, new fun feature that we added to the game. We can now go build things. So let's send Carl over here. And we were asking, what are the hard points going to look like? How do we tell the player where you can build and where you can't build? And we looked at the lore of the game. And the lore of the game is that there is this ancient continent, and the continent has been deserted. And there used to be a big thriving culture on this continent. There used to be people over here that did things and whatnot. And they all died out. And since they all died out, they have left ruins. And so the places where you can build things are where the ruins are. So we can see here's some ruins. Let's send Carl over to the ruins. Hey, Carl, go do your thing, Carl. All right, and send Carl to the ruins. Carl is now at the ruins, and you'll notice there is a new icon for Carl. Here is the build icon, and look, I can choose to build things. So now you can build a thing. Notice there are only 3 things for Carl to build right now. And what happens is he can actually upgrade those things into bigger and better things later. For right now, because I want some gold and whatnot, I will, the fortification offers me a good bit of gold. Let's go ahead and build one of them. End turn, and boom. We'll get effects and stuff later. But now you can build. So now Carl has built a thing. You'll also notice another big change. By the way, this portal art sucks and it will change. This doesn't look very good. We will have new portal art later. But this is a portal. New rule in the game. We had all of this... we had all of these sort of rules about you can build on ports and cities and blah, 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 and nobody understood it. So I said, you know what? Let's have portals. Lore is you're portaling in your mercenaries, and they're coming to fight from you from other places to fight in this environment, and to portal in your allies, you have to have a portal. How does building work? So the rules of building. 1, I can only build on a hard point. All these little ruins, right? So where these ruins are, that's somewhere I can build. So if I were to send my little leopards over there, I would see there's a place where I could theoretically build. Now, rule 2, only troops that have the build ability can build. Now, all of the heroes can build. So you'll notice Carl can build. Buildings come in 4 different flavors. There are human buildings, there are highborn buildings, there are goblin orc buildings, and there are kobold buildings. Those are the 4 flavors of building that exist. Your builder has the ability to build one of those racial type buildings. So, for instance, Carl can build human buildings. Right? So, once I've built a human building, the human building can be upgraded along the human building build chart. So, for instance, now that he's built himself that thing, we can upgrade that into into a farm, or we can upgrade it into a great hall. And then the great hall, by the way, can be upgraded into a village. So let's go ahead and do that. The highborn can build some stuff. Notice the highborn's got a different build tree than the human did, because the highborn engineers can build highborn buildings. So she can build one of these mage towers. She can also build a portal, or she can build an elven homestead. I'm going to build a mage tower, because why not? That's what I wanted to show you today. That's what we're up to. The rest of the day, I'm going to be quietly testing things and fixing things. For anyone who's interested, we will be doing another one of these live streams in exactly 2 weeks. I'll go back to once a week when I think we've got enough stuff every week to make a once a week stream make sense. But for the moment, we're going to do every other week so we can keep concentrated on what we are doing. Yeah, that's it.